All right, welcome everybody. My name is Mike, and I'm joined by Dr. Donald Wallenfang, who is a theology professor at Walsh University. And we're just going to be doing a little bit of an introduction video, getting to know him a little bit, and just who he is, what his story is, how he ended up where he is today. So tell us, you're a theology professor. How did that come to be? Where did you go to school? How did you become interested in theology?
Thanks so much, Mike. Thanks for your question. Thanks for your interest. It's so fun to be talking together today about this, and I'd love to share a bit about my story as well as hear about your story and other people's stories, because it's the stuff of life and the stuff that really matters. So to get this invitation to just share a bit about my life, I love to do so. So growing up with the Wallenfangs, there were three big things that were important in our home, and they were get good grades, do well in school, work really hard, do your best. Both my parents growing up did very well in school, and so they really encouraged us in that way. And second was music was a huge thing. My dad's favorite composer was Beethoven. I always had these Beethoven symphonies playing in the background. Yeah. And the third thing was sports. Sports was huge. Watched lots of football on TV and basketball. Played sports constantly in my neighborhood growing up with the other kids. And so these three things are huge. And I went to Catholic school, kindergarten through the 12th grade, and would graduate. And I wanted to become a medical doctor. I had all these, what I call doctor books growing up in this era of Doogie Howser, MD, the television series. This precocious young guy who goes through medical school becomes this prodigious physician, and I really emulated him in my life. I wanted to be this doctor, and I saw it paid pretty well too. So that's what I was after, as well as wanted to be a professional athlete like so many other young kids, playing for the Green Bay Packers perhaps, if all went as planned. And anyways, I ended up going to Albion College, a small liberal arts school in South Central Michigan, and played football for 3 years, and did start off as a pre-med major, taking all the biology and the chemistry, and everything was survived and thrived my first year of college, but then got to the second year with organic chemistry and music theory, and football's going on, and I started to feel like I was really getting spread thin as much work as I knew that was needed in all of these three areas. So then I ended up really growing in my faith at the time. I read the whole Bible my freshman year of college through a one-year Bible reading plan, because I had gone to this conference called Urbana at University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, and it was like a Christian missions conference, and one of the speakers challenged everyone to read the whole Bible, read every word of it. If we're followers of Christ, this should be the most dear text in our lives. So I took her up on it. I got up a little earlier every morning and was reading chapters in Scripture and growing tons in my faith. I was involved in Fellowship of Christian Athletes, University Christian Fellowship, sang in a gospel choir. I had a lot of friends who went to different Christian churches, and I would accompany them going to these worship services, hearing great preaching, as well as staying rooted in my Catholic faith, going to Catholic liturgy every week. So I had this kind of best of both worlds when it comes to Christianity, the rich sacramental life of the Catholic Church and all the teachings of the Church, as well as the fervent preaching and attention to Scripture and all the Bible study stuff going on in the Protestant world. So these both were working strongly in my life, and I ended up switching to a music major and got my bachelor's degree in trumpet performance. So I had no job lined up, and I was married to Megan, and had this degree, had a baby on the way. The month I graduated with my bachelor's in trumpet performance, our baby Ellen was due to be born. I had to have hernia surgery, I think probably from all the weights I lifted in football, and all the trumpet playing, all these pressure on the lower viscera.
Of course you would know that.
And so it was looking like, man, what's going to happen here? I need to get a job, and at one point, at a kind of low point, I went to an employment agency even, and was like, I'll do something clerical, I'll do something manual labor, whatever. I just got to get a job. And all of a sudden, this door opened up wide, where I could become a youth minister in the Catholic Church with the music background. I also play guitar and sing, could lead worship, and then we had some volunteer experience and some part-time experience in youth ministry. So ended up getting into full-time youth ministry in the Catholic Church, and one thing led to another, where I ended up having to get a master's degree out of necessity. Got that from St. Norbert College in Green Bay, Wisconsin, when I was working in that area at a church there. And then that experience opened the door for a more extensive position as director of youth ministry at a Catholic church in Naperville, Illinois, a large suburban area of Chicago. And then I moved to study for a PhD at Loyola University, Chicago at that time, and then felt called into academia from there.
Awesome. In the 3 books you've written so far, they're centered mainly around phenomenology and metaphysics. Those are 2 very common themes in the books that you have written. How did you get introduced to phenomenology, metaphysics? Even Edith Stein is a huge part of your book, Human and Divine Being. Where did you become introduced to that? And would you mind giving us a brief explanation as to what metaphysics and phenomenology is?
Definitely. The way I like to approach so many concepts in philosophy and theology is just simply breaking down the words to see what meanings are inside of them. And so with the term metaphysics, we hear the term physics at the heart of it, and physics comes from a Greek word that means nature, essentially. So we have...
I'm sorry. Can I just redo the question?
Oh, yeah.
Instead of how are you introduced, maybe I'll just say where. Could you give us? These are 2. What's the best way to phrase that? They're very. The 3 books you've written are rooted in metaphysics and phenomenology. Can you give us a brief explanation as to what those are?
Yeah.
Okay. So Dr. Wallenfang has written 3 books, and they were published last year, over the past couple years. And they were published over the past couple years. They're very rooted in metaphysics and phenomenology. So Dr. Wallenfang, could you give us a brief explanation as to what those are and how they worked into your writings?
Yeah, for sure. I love talking about metaphysics and phenomenology, some of my favorite topics of conversation, the favorite questions I love to be asked. What is phenomenology? Oh, glad you asked. How much time do you have? So to try to keep it succinct, what each of these are and how they influenced my thinking and then eventually writing, I love to share about this. So first of all, it goes back to my love for science in general. Natural sciences, physics, chemistry, biology, as related to medicine.
Okay.
And in medieval times when the university got started, there were 3 privileged topics of study that were law and medicine and theology, interestingly. And so I saw this interconnection between theology as a science, literally the science of God as its object of study, which is really a paradoxical thing. God, who is no object as such, but certainly transcends all objects and all beings as being itself. And so that's when we get into metaphysics for sure, which is this science rooted in the natural world, in physics, but yet goes to what is behind it, what is beyond it. And that's what the meta prefix is pointing to this in terms of its essential meaning. So I love to get at the heart of things, get at what a thing is in its essence, in its substance, and how things share existence in common, but as individual beings.
Okay.
So this is what I'm attracted to by metaphysics, which is really the bedrock of all what's called perennial philosophy, going back to ancient Greek philosophy, charged through the liberal arts tradition and the formation of the university in medieval times, and the great scholastic theologians like Albert the Great and Peter Lombard, Bonaventure, Thomas Aquinas, these figures who are doing theology in the new academic setting. So this physics directly related to physics and nature, and all this goes together. Being as scientific as possible, wanting to get to the bottom of things, the beginning of things, the end of things, and everything in between. Everything is fair game for thought. So since we ask these deep questions about where do we come from, where does the universe come from, what is the cause, what is the end, the goal, what is the purpose? We ask all these questions out of our intellect, and because we ask the questions, the answers are what are presupposed. We ask the questions as a response to the answer that already is given in advance, and so we follow with the question. And so this is what I love about learning, what I love about education, what I love about study, about reading, about conversation, that we're trying to get to the heart of the matter. And metaphysics helps us do just that as the science of first things, the science of first principles, which is the greatest and the highest kind of science because it's the most comprehensive and it requires the most intellectual capacity, because we're asking some pretty big questions, in fact saturating questions, that take a lot of patience, a lot of rumination, a lot of contemplation. And so that's trying to say something about metaphysics. And then phenomenology was something I started to learn in my master's work in theology. As I was reading especially some work of Karl Rahner. Karl Rahner, this 20th century German Catholic theologian, a Jesuit, who studied phenomenology, especially the work of a phenomenologist called Martin Heidegger, and was incorporating some of this with also a study of Thomas Aquinas, who's using primarily metaphysics. So you start to see this sort of blend of method with metaphysics and phenomenology in the context of Catholic theology, and I was very fascinated by this, and I was very much won over by this upon reading Karl Rahner's Foundations of Christian Faith with Dr. Howard Ebert at St. Norbert College, who did his dissertation work on Rahner. And so I really fell in love with this way of doing theology. At the same time, I'm reading a lot of Joseph Ratzinger, who became Pope Benedict XVI, who's coming out of a more Augustinian perspective, a little more influenced by the philosophy of Plato, more so than Aristotle that you find with Thomas Aquinas and Karl Rahner. So my master's thesis, for instance, I'm kind of juxtaposing Ratzinger's work in Principles of Catholic Theology and Rahner's work in Foundations of Christian Faith, and kind of having these speak to each other and seeing what kind of fruit comes about in bringing these kind of contrasting yet complementary voices together. So my interest in phenomenology continued into my PhD work, especially studying with Dr. John McCarthy there, who had studied at University of Chicago for his doctorate, with David Tracy, with Paul Ricoeur, and what I understand to be the kind of Chicago school of doing theology, which is very much influenced by the method of phenomenology.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And if you're interested in watching more videos that we've produced together, I'm going to throw those down in the description, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks once again for joining us today.
Thank you, Mike.